Hello, everyone, and welcome back to our virtual Mishnah, Dirshu Mishnah Berurah here. We are holding in Mishnah Berurah, Chelik Hey. Today's daf in the Dirshu Daf Yomi Bahalacha is Kov Zayin Amid Aleph, and we are continuing to learn Siman Taf Tzadik Ches in Hilchos Yom Tov. And just excuse me here while I adjust the microphone. Sorry. Okay, so we're in Taf Tzadik Ches, and we find ourselves in the middle of Siv Gimel. So just to remind ourselves what it was that we were discussing here, we're talking about animals and whether or not they're considered mukhan for Yom Tov use, whether or not you could take from them and check from them on Yom Tov. So I'm just going to read quickly from the beginning of Siv Gimel so we can recapture what we were in the middle of. The Mechaber says, when we have animals that typically stay outside of the tchum, we explained that this means there are animals that stay for the entire summer season. They stay out in the pasture, away from the city, out of the tchum, and they don't come home even at night. So they stay out in the pasture for the whole summer season, and then they start coming home when it gets cold outside in the month of Cheshvan. So such animals that typically remain out of the tchum, but they happen to come on Yom Tov and they happen to be located within the tchum. The Mechaber says, these are considered mukhan for Yom Tov use, and you can take from them, and we explained that this is, since they do sometimes come, these are considered like behemoths, basios. They're considered like animals that do occasionally come home, and therefore they are considered to be mukhan. Then the Mechaber continued, and the Mechaber said, Aval haroyos v'halonos chutz l'tchum. However, I'm sorry, I said this wrong. My mistake. The beginning of Sif Gimel is talking about not animals that stay out for the entire season. My mistake. The beginning of Sif Gimel was discussing over here. If you take a look in the Mishnah Berurah, nice cut in Yud Beis, we're talking about animals that they don't stay out for the whole season. They sometimes come back into the Yishuv and sometimes they do not. That's what the beginning of Sif Gimel is talking about. Now the Mechaber continues and he says, Aval haroyos v'halonos chutz l'tchum. But the animals that typically stay outside of the Yishuv, those are the animals that stay out of the Yishuv for the entire summer season. In Bo b'Yom Tov, if such an animal comes back on Yom Tov, ein shaykh denaisan b'Yom Tov v'pnei shehin muktzin ve'ein das anshir ir aleihen. Then the Mechaber says, those kind of animals you can't shech, because you did not expect them to come, and your das was not on those animals. Okay, and now we pick up where we were up to on the second line from the bottom in the Shulchan Aruch. The Mechaber says, "V'hani mili b'bahamas Yisrael." This whole discussion is only when we're talking about animals that belong to a Yid. When we're talking about animals that belong to a Yisrael, that's when we can have a potential problem of muktzah. Aval shel eina Yehudi, but when we're dealing with animals that belong to a non-Jew, less behu mishum muktzah, then there is no potential problem of muktzah at all. Why? Because the property of a non-Jew does not require hachana. It doesn't have to be made mukhan for Yom Tov, because a guy doesn't have any tzivoy of Yom Tov. To a non-Jew, there is no prohibition of Yom Tov. Therefore, any animal that belongs to a non-Jew is mukhan for the non-Jew's use. He could use any animal anywhere that it may be. So no matter where a non-Jew's animal is, he could go get it, and now he could theoretically bring it somewhere where a Yid can use it. So there is no muktzah issue. Yehudi tzarich hachen, ella, with the exception of im came bo b'shvil Yisrael she'az aser. Let's say a non-Jew had an animal that was located outside of the tchum, and he knows that his Yiddish neighbor needs an animal for the Yom Tov Suda, so he goes out of the tchum and he brings in this animal from out of the tchum on Yom Tov. So now he's doing malacha on behalf of his Yiddish neighbor. So then for the Yiddish neighbor, that animal would be prohibited because a non-Jew did malacha for him. But let's say that's not the case. Let's say the non-Jew did not bring it into the tchum on behalf of a Yid. He brought it in for whatever reason. So now, if a Yid wants to take it, a Yid could use it. Says the Mishnah Berurah, nice cut Yud Zayin. The property of a non-Jew does not require hachana. It's automatically considered muchan for Yom Tov use. In the Mishnah Berurah Sivkat Mem Ches. Therefore, even if a non-Jew had one of these types of animals that stays for the entire summer season out of the yishuv, out of the tchum, les lamba, we don't have a problem. That animal could still be rendered mutter for Yom Tov use, because again, the guy doesn't have a problem bringing in an animal from outside the tchum on Yom Tov, so it doesn't need achana, unless he does it specifically for a non-Jew. Then the animal will be aser al kalpanim li Yisrael zeh shehuva avurai, at least for the Yisrael that was brought for. So if Tony, the non-Jew, went outside of the tchum on Yom Tov to bring an animal for his Yiddish neighbor Ruvain, so then for Ruvain that animal will be aser because Tony did malacha for Ruvain on Yom Tov, and that's prohibited. Mitar Miser Tchumen. But Shimon, who lives down the block, Tony didn't bring in the animal for Shimon. Tony brought the animal in for Ruvain. Now Ruvain's not using the animal because it's also for him because Tony did malacha on his behalf. But Shimon could use it. So Shimon could go ahead and buy that animal. Of course, he's not going to make a real purchase on Yom Tov, but Shimon could use that animal on Yom Tov, even though the guy brought it in from outside of the tchum, because the guy was allowed to bring it out from out of the tchum, and it wasn't done for him. Now, before we go further in the Mechaber, let's learn Mishnah Berurah is cutting Yud Tes, who's going to correct the text that we have here in the Mechaber. Is cutting Yud Tes, Lefikachim Yadua. Halashain Begumgum Ktsas, the Chavetz Chaim tells us that the language of the Mechaber over here coming up is imprecise. Daina Messiah in Yana Deresha, because the Mechaber is about to say Lefikach, therefore, but he's not really going back on what he just said. Really, by this word Lefikach, the Mechaber is discussing another case. The Chaser kan ezet tevis, and several words are missing here from our text. As the Chavetz Chaim explains in the Bir Halacha Divrei Maschal Lefikach. V'chein tzarich loymar, and this is what the words of the Mechaber really should say. V'dafka, this whole potential problem of muktzah on the animal of the guy, kishiyadua shalanu chutz l'tchum v'loy b'safik. That's only true when we know for sure that the animal came from outside of the tchum, but not if there's a suffix. And then we pick up with the word lefikach. Excuse me. So now let's take a look at the words of the Mechaber over here. So the Mechaber says, lefikach, since we only have a problem with an animal that we know for certain came out of the tchum, eino Yehudi shehevi behema b'makolim. If a non-Jew brought an animal to the slaughterhouse, perish, what's a makolim? The slaughterhouse where they slaughter the animals. If we know for sure that this was an animal that started out Yom Tov outside of the tchum, then asurais, then that animal will be asur. If we know that the animal came from outside of the tchum on Yom Tov, and as the Chavetz Chaim says, we're discussing a case where it's a city that's mostly Yidden, and the assumption is that the non-Jew brought the animal in from outside of the tchum on behalf of the Yidden of the city. So then the animal would be asur on Yom Tov. V'im safek, however, if there's a safek whether this animal came from outside of the tchum, we don't know for certain that this animal was brought in by the non-Jew from outside of the tchum. Maybe this animal was already within the tchum at the outset of Yom Tov. Then mutarais, then the animal is mutter, afilu ba'u l'tzarich Yisrael. Even if the guy is bringing the animal to the slaughterhouse on behalf of the Yidden of the city. There's no problem. Shehamuktzah holchem b'sveikai lahakil. Because when we're dealing with muktzah of an item that came from outside of the tchum, as the Mishnah Berurah is going to explain, this does not mean that any suffix muktzah we go lahakil. It means specifically this type of muktzah. When we're dealing with the muktzah of an item that came from outside of the tchum, if we're dealing with a suffix, we rule leniently. So, if we know that the non-Jew brought an animal from outside of the tchum, and he brought it in on Yom Tov, and he did it on behalf of the Yidden of the city, then that animal is muktzah, and that animal cannot be used by the Yidden of the city. However, if we don't know for certain that this animal started out Yom Tov outside the tchum, for all we know, this is an animal that was grazing right outside the city, and it was within the tchum. And now the guy brought it to the slaughterhouse because he knows that today is the holiday of the Jews of the city, so he's bringing it for the Jews. Now there's no problem because it's only a suffix whether or not this came from outside of the tchum. And when we're dealing with a suffix of an item that came from outside of the tchum, we rule leniently. And now, let's say we're talking about a city which is mostly non-Jews. So now we can't even say that the non-Jew brought the animal over here on behalf of the Yidden. Really, it's a city that's mostly non-Jews. So who's to say that he brought it on behalf of the Yidden? Or if we don't, not that we know that he brought it for the non-Jews, but we don't know why he brought it. But we're dealing with a city that's mostly non-Jews. Be'ir sheruba einam Yehudim, mutter, then the animal is mutter shekala mevi l'tzarach haroiv mevi. Because our default position is that when somebody brings an animal to the slaughterhouse to be slaughtered, he's doing it on behalf of the majority of the city. He's not doing it bedafka on behalf of the minority Jewish population. He's doing it based on the majority of the city. He just wants somebody to buy his meat. Says the Mishnah Berurah. Let's go back to Kov Zayin Amud Aleph. Ice cut and chaf on the bottom line. Shehevi behema b'makolim. A non-Jew who brought an animal to the slaughterhouse. Sheyesh mekaymai shehanachmer meviyin behemais b'makolim shel Yisrael. There were towns and locales where it was common for non-Jewish ranchers to bring their animals to the Yiddish slaughterhouses. The Yisrael shoichet, and there would be a Yiddish shoichet there who would check the behemoth properly, u'moichrem abasar, and they would sell the meat. And if we have a suffix regarding this behemoth, we have a suffix, maybe it's possible that the non-Jew brought this animal on Yom Tov from outside of the Tchum, ein lesser. We're not going to prohibit the animal based on that suffix that maybe it was brought from outside of the Tchum. If we know that the animal came from outside of the Tchum, shalanu is tzarich lomer shalanu. Over here, the Chavetz Chaim is just making a grammatical correction on the top line of the Mechaber. The Mechaber wrote, "Im yodua shalon nois chutz latchum." If we know that they were lun, they spent the night, these animals, outside of the Tchum, so they started Yom Tov outside of the Tchum. Says the Chavetz Chaim, it shouldn't be shalon nois, it should be shalanu. If we know for sure that the non-Jew brought it from outside, so okay, so then it would be aser. That's only talking about a city where the majority of the populace is not non-Jews, but rather they're Jews. Then the animal is going to be aser because we know for certain that the non-Jew brought it from outside of the Tchum, and the majority of the city is Yidden. So minastam, our default position is that why did he bring it to the Makoilin? Why did he bring it to the slaughterhouse? In the hope that a Jew will buy it and use it. So that means he did malacha on behalf of the Yidden. But if we have a suffix, if there's only a suffix, maybe the animal was brought from outside of the Tchum, then we said it's mutter, gimel, because literally the words of the Mechaber mean that by the Isser of Muktzah, we always go Lekula. Says the Chavetz Chaim, what the Mechaber really wants to say over here is not that a suffix Muktzah is always Lekula. What he wants to say is the Isser shel chutz latchum, when we're talking about the prohibition of an object that was brought from outside of the Tchum, the Kari Leinami Muktzah, and the Mechaber refers to such an item as being Muktzah. Aval B'Safik Muchan, but when we're dealing with a standard issue Safik of Muktzah, and that is we have a Safik whether or not something is considered Muchan for Yom Tov use or it's considered Muktzah, Bevadai L'Chumra Azlinan, then we rule stringently. We go L'Chumra. Siman Tav Tzadik Zayin Siv Gimel V'Dalet. Over there we were talking about Safik Tzeda. We're not sure if something is considered Nitzayid or not, so we go L'Chumra. Why? Because in a Safik Muktzah, that's a case of Safik Muktzah. We don't know if an animal was trapped before Yom Tov or it became trapped on Yom Tov. If it was trapped before Yom Tov, then it's Muchan for Yom Tov use. If it was trapped on Yom Tov, then at the outset of Yom Tov, it was not Muchan for Yom Tov use. It's a Safik. That's a real Safik Muktzah. Over there we said in Tav Tzadik Zayin, we go L'Chumra. Over here when the Mechaber says that a Safik Muktzah, we go L'Kula, he's speaking specifically about this Safik Muktzah of an item that may have come from outside of the Tchum. Now says the Chavetz Chaim, the Mechaber over here, Hechazik B'Shitas HaPoskim, he's following the opinion of the Poskim, the Tchumin Kila, that we rule more leniently by an Isser of Tchum, V'loy Machmirinon B'Sfeika, and we're not machmir by a suffix whether an item came from outside of the Tchum or not. That's obviously the way the Mechaber is paskening over here. Ukvar Tamu HaAchronim, and the Achronim look at this psak of the Mechaber in wonderment. Tabakama Mekaymais Pasakedas HaPoskim Lahachmir. Gam b'safik tchumen, because we find many other places where the Mechaber is actually machmir on a suffix of tchumen, the same way he's machmir by a suffix of regular muktzah. Ayin b'simin shin chaf hey sif tes b'simin taf kuf tes vav as examples. B'sif dalid yispaer, and we're going to talk about this more in the coming sif of the Shulchan Aruch. Ayis katan chav dalid l'tzorich hanachri. The Mechaber said, if we know that the non-Jew brought the animal from outside of the Tchum for another non-Jew, then the animal is going to be mutter even in a city that's Ruba Yisrael. Why? Because if Tony brought the animal in from outside of the Tchum for his cousin Vinny, and then his cousin Vinny decided he doesn't want it, and now it's inside the Tchum, so now he wants to sell it to a Yid, that's not a problem. He didn't do the malacha for the Yid. He did the malacha for his cousin Vinny. Says the Chavetz Chaim is cutting chavdala l'tzarech hanachri. What the Mechaber wants to say over here is the Oz in that case when the guy did the malacha, he brought in the animal from outside of the Tchum specifically for another non-Jew. Then the animal is mutter afilu hi ir shal Yisrael, even if the city is a Yiddish city. Now we go to Siv Dalet. The Heimais, Hayaduais, Lanu, Chutz, Lalun, Chutz, Latchum, animals that we know typically spend their time outside of the Tchum. And if you take a look right away in Ois Katan Chavhei, says the Mishnah Berurah, Hainu Hach to Siv Gimel. Over here, we're referring to the same kind of animals that we started out with in Siv Gimel. We're talking about animals that typically are outside of the Tchum, and now they showed up in the Tchum. And we said over there in Sif Gimel, at the beginning of Sif Gimel, we said that such an animal that typically is outside of the Tchum, and now it came into the Tchum, so we said it's considered muchan, it's considered prepared for Yom Tov use, and you're allowed to use those animals on Yom Tov. So again, to remind ourselves, this is the mistake that I made earlier at the outset of this year, so I just want to make sure that we have this straight. We're talking over here about the same kind of animal that we were talking about at the beginning of Sif Gimel. That is an animal that spends the majority of its time outside of the Tchum, but in the words of the Mishnah Berurah, Nois Katan Yud Beis on Kuf Zayin Amud Aleph, Afilu Shebayim Liprokim Lolun. If it sometimes comes into the Tchum to spend the night, that's an animal that's considered muchan for Yom Tov use. So here in Sif Dalet, the Mechaber is addressing the same kind of animal. It's an animal that spends a lot of time outside the Tchum, but on occasion it comes into the Tchum. That kind of animal, we said in Sif Gimel, is muchan for Yom Tov use. Now the Mechaber is telling me another halacha addressing another case with such an animal, and he's continuing his discussion of a non-Jew that brings an animal for use on Yom Tov. So, behemais hayaduais lalon chutz latchum, an animal that typically spends a lot of time outside of the tchum. V'nimtzu ba'ir, and now on Yom Tov it is found within the city limits, within the tchum. And the words on the mechaber here are b'yom sheni, but that's a toyus. It's supposed to say b'yom toiv. So now on Yom Tov this animal is found within the tchum limits. Ani oimer, and the reason it's found within the tchum limits now on Yom Tov is not that it wandered in. That's the case of Sif Gimel. The case of Sif Gimel is the animal came in on its own. So we said, okay, it came in on its own. It's considered muchan because every now and then we find these kind of animals inside the city. So, okay, even though it came from outside of the city, it's considered muchan because it's not a surprise that we found it within the city. Over here, we're talking about where a non-Jew brought it into the city. So we have an animal that typically spends a lot of its time outside of the tchum. And now we found a non-Jew with such an animal in the tchum on Yom Tov. That's the way the Mishnah Berurah explains this case. What's the halacha? Says the mechaber, Ani oimer, I can say, Shema mi ba'erev hichnisan, maybe, even though I didn't see this animal by the guy at the outset of Yom Tov. At the outset of Yom Tov, I walked by this non-Jew's house, and he has a pasture behind his house. I didn't see this animal over there in the pasture at the outset of Yom Tov. Now, Yom Tov morning, I see the non-Jew with this animal in the slaughterhouse. So again, I don't know what the status of this animal is. Says the mechaber, Ani oimer, I can say, Shema mi ba'erev hichnisan. It could be that the non-Jew brought in this animal last night before Yom Tov began. V'chutz l'chayma lanu, and why didn't I see it? Because it didn't spend time. He didn't bring it to the pasture behind his house. He brought it within the tchum, but it was outside the wall of the city. But it was within the tchum, umutarais, and it's mutter. Says the Mishnah Berurah. Let's read the whole ice cut l'chafei now. Behemais hayaduais hainu hachtesiv gimel. Like I said, we're addressing here the same kind of animal that we addressed at the outset of Siv Gimel. This is an animal that spends a lot of its time outside of the tchum, but on occasion it comes into the tchum. Ella, the revusa kamash balan. Now the mechaber is telling me another chiddush. Sha'afilu habehema sheroyim hayoim eitzel akum. Even the animal that we see today on Yom Tov by the non-Jew, yeduim slanu shedarkam lanu chutz l'tchum. We know that it's a type of animal that generally stays outside of the tchum. So now it's Yom Tov morning, and I see that the non-Jew has one of these types of animals by him in the slaughterhouse. And we didn't see this animal inside the city last night when Yom Tov started, or even on Erev Yom Tov, we didn't see this animal inside the tchum. We didn't see it in the city. And therefore I might have thought to say, the gam ata hayokain, that really even now, Yom Tov morning, this animal really started out the day outside of the tchum. And just the non-Jew went outside of the tchum, and he brought it into the tchum now to bring it to the slaughterhouse for the Jews that eat a Yom Tov meal. Kamash Balan, the mechaber is coming to teach me the gam bazel nafak miklal sveka, that this is still considered a suffix. The Shema Shaper Heviyame Esmail, because maybe in reality the non-Jew did bring this animal from outside of the tchum yesterday before Yom Tov began. Just you didn't see it because it stayed outside the walls of the city. And then in the morning he brought it into the city to bring it to the slaughterhouse. The words of the mechaber were b'yom sheni. The Mefarshim write to us that this is a mistake in the text. Okay, so that was the beginning of Siv Dalet. That's the first halacha here in Siv Dalet. Now the mechaber continues, and the mechaber says, "V'chol shekain hashchutais ba'boker," and certainly animals that the Nachri is having slaughtered in the morning of Yom Tov. Let's take a look in the Mishnah Berurah's Kotlich of Zion. What the Mechaber wants to say over here is the non-Jew brought it to the slaughterhouse in the morning. So I could say that certainly he brought these animals into the Tchum from before Yom Tov began, so that it shouldn't take him too long. Listen, he doesn't want to come to the slaughterhouse Yom Tov morning at 12 o'clock. That's going to be too late for the Eden to use it for the Suda. This all goes according to the Mechaber Shita, the Betchumen Talinan Lahakel, Kalzman She'enoi Baralanu. All the Mechaber is establishing over here is he's going according to his opinion that he stated previously, that when we have a suffix whether or not something came from out of the Tchum on Yom Tov, we could go Lakula. And that's what he's establishing over here in these cases as well. He's saying we don't know when the non-Jew brought this animal into the Tchum, so we could consider it a suffix, that there's at least a suffix. Maybe he brought it in from before Yom Tov. However, the Chavetz Chaim says, I already wrote, that the Mechaber in many other places is machmir on a suffix of whether or not something came from outside of the Tchum. The rules that we should not be lenient with this. Only in cases where the non-Jew is staying in the city, and he has animals that are within the Tchum. In other words, if we have a non-Jewish behema dealer, and we know that he has pastures within the Tchum, so then there's no reason for us to be machzik isura. There's no reason for us to have a presumption of isur and say, oh, maybe this animal came from outside of the Tchum. Why should you say that? Look at the Leil, the Siman Zayin Sivdal. Sif Hey, Egel Shenoilad B'Yom Tov. Let's say you have a calf that was born on Yom Tov. Okay? Mutter l'shachtoi, you're allowed to take this newborn calf and you could shecht it for Yom Tov use. Im ha'em oimedes la'achila. If the mother animal was an animal that was oimed la'achila. If it's not a dairy cow, if it's a meat cow, if it's a cow that's oimed la'achila, that you might shecht to eat, then you could shecht the newborn calf even though it was born on Yom Tov. Now let's take a look, before we go weiter, let's take a look at the Mishnah Berurah's Kotlich of Ches. We're talking about when the mother cow was a cow that was a medas la'achila, that was prepared for eating purposes, not a dairy cow. Return to Leimer, what the Mechaber wants to say is, the oz mutter, then the calf is mutter, even though it was born on Yom Tov. Afilu lamai the pasuk la'el b'simin tav tzadikei siv daled, the muktzah aser b'Yom Tov. Even though we learned the Mechaber paskined earlier in tav tzadikei siv daled, that we're machmir on muktzah on Yom Tov, even more than we're machmir on muktzah on Shabbos, and therefore you might think that this animal is not considered muchan. This animal wasn't alive at the outset of Yom Tov. This animal was in its mother's womb on the outset of Yom Tov. So in what way was it muchan? You might think that it's muktzah, and you can't check that on Yom Tov. Nevertheless, even according to the stringent opinion of the Mechaber, who holds that we're machmer on muktzah on Yom Tov, nevertheless, this newborn calf is mutter. Why? Explains the Chavetz Chaim. Omitam, the rationale is, because since the mother animal is oimed la'achila, since this is a cow that could be used for eating purposes, that's why the farmer is raising this cow. He's raising it for meat. Hareu muchan agav imoi. So the baby, the unborn baby calf, was muchan because its mother was muchan. Shem haya roitza, because if the rancher wanted, he could have slaughtered the mother cow before the calf was born, and then he can eat both the mother and the unborn calf on Yom Tov. If you have a pregnant cow that has an unborn calf in her womb, and you shecht it on Yom Tov, which is perfectly fine. Now that shechita on the mother renders the unborn calf mutter as well. So the unborn calf was muchan. It was muchan because the mother was muchan. Continues the Chavetz Chaim and he says, even, let's say we know that the mother is a treifa. Well, if the mother is a treifa, now you can't tell me that I could have shechted the mother and be matir the mother and the unborn calf with the shechita on the mother. That's not true. The mother is a treifa. Yet, nevertheless, still, if the calf is born on Yom Tov, I could check that on Yom Tov because it's considered muchan, because its mother was muchan. How was the mother muchan? Explains the Chavetz Chaim, even though we know the mother is a treifa, Eino muktzah b'Yom Tov, it's still not muktzah, the mother, sharehi muchenes kfar leklavim, because even though it's a treifa, you could slaughter it, you could feed it to the dogs. So the mother was muchan for Yom Tov use. So then the egel, the unborn calf, was also muchan. Im came gama egel memela in a muktzah. Now says the Chavetz Chaim, lefi minig medina isenu, according to the minig of our regions, she'ein oisrin muktzah b'Yom Tov ela noilad, we rule like the lenient opinion that was brought down in the Ramah in Tav Tzadikei Siv Dalud, where we're makel on muktzah on Yom Tov the same way in the same cases that we're makel on muktzah on Shabbos, ela noilad, except for cases of noilad. According to that shita, eish lahater egel shenoilad b'Yom Tov, then we could be matir a calf that was born on Yom Tov, afilu im imay oimedes legadol vlodos, even if the mother was not a medes la'achila. Let's say the mother cow was not being raised for slaughter, for eating. Let's say it was a dairy cow, or let's say it was a cow that was being set aside to raise babies. So, according to the strict opinion of the Mechaber, that kind of animal is muktzah. It's not muchan for Yom Tov use. You set it aside to be a dairy cow. You set it aside to raise baby calves. So your das wasn't on it to slaughter it for Yom Tov. So it's not muchan for Yom Tov use. It's muktzah. That's the stringent opinion of the Mechaber. That's why the Mechaber says, when is this halacha true? Only when the mother was a medes la'achila. That's when you could check the newborn calf. Because since the mother was a medes la'achila, it's muchan for Yom Tov use, so the calf is also muchan for Yom Tov use. But according to the way we paskin, according to the more lenient opinion of the Ramah, where we're not so machmer and muktzah on Yom Tov, then even a cow that's not a medes la'achila, even if it's a medes la'chalav, even if it's a dairy cow, or it's a cow that was set aside to raise baby calves, that's also considered muchan for Yom Tov use, according to the more lenient opinion, because it could be that I will decide to shecht it on Yom Tov. So then this halacha would be true even for a dairy cow, or even for a calf-raising cow. Now you might say, well, why don't I answer this newborn calf because of noilad? It's literally noilad. It was born on Yom Tov, so it wasn't alive yesterday. Says the Chavetz Chaim, no, that's a misunderstanding of what noilad means. The body of the calf did not change from yesterday to today. The only thing is the location is different. Yesterday it was in the womb, now in Yom Tov it's not. It was completely royal achila yesterday if you shechted the mother. The same way it's royal achila now after it's born. Okay, now we continue in Sif Hay, right by the Ois Cotton Chav test for the Mishnah Berurah. There's a caveat to this halacha. Says the Mechaber, when is it true that the newborn calf is mutter for Yom Tov use? That's only if we know that this newborn calf is a full-term baby calf. So we don't have to be chayshish, we don't have to be concerned, maybe it's a nefil. Maybe it's not a viable calf. Maybe it's not a full-term calf, it's not a viable calf, and maybe it's going to die. In that case, it's considered a treifa, and even if you shecht it, you're not matir it. The shechita is not effective to render it permissible, because we have to be chayshish, maybe it's a nefil. Explains the Mishnah Berurah, it's cut the chav tes. V'hu de kimlei, That's only if we could look at this newborn calf and we could establish that it's a full-term calf. Then we don't have to worry that maybe it's a nafel and maybe it's a treifa, and therefore we're allowed to shecht it on Yom Tov, and we're allowed to use it on Yom Tov because it's muchan agav imoy, because it's considered muchan because its mother was muchan. Says the Chavetz Chaim, idna. Nowadays, ein anu bekiyan bazeh. We do not have the knowledge to be able to look at a newborn calf and establish that it is a full-term calf. K'deisa b'yardeh siman yud gimel seif siv gimel. Valkein, therefore, ein sheichten egel shenoiled b'yom tov oy b'shabbos erev yom tov. Therefore, we are not allowed to shecht a newborn calf that was born on Yom Tov or on Shabbos when erev Yom Tov falls out on a Shabbos. If it was born on Shabbos of erev Yom Tov, kaidem yomi shmini. If it's before the 8th day that this animal is alive, because until the beginning of the 8th day, until the beginning of the night of the animal's 8th day, we have to be concerned shemen nefel. And in such cases, in cases where you have to wait until the baby is 8 days old, the calf is 8 days old in order to shecht it. And the 8th day falls out on the first day of Yom Tov. It might be usher to shecht a baby calf on its 8th day if the 8th day fell out on Yom Tov. Why? Because at Ben Hashmashas, at the outset of Yom Tov, this baby calf was not yet rendered mutter because it wasn't yet 8 days old. And since it wasn't 8 days old, we have a concern it might be an ephel. And since it was usher at the outset of Yom Tov, it's usher for the whole Yom Tov. Aval the Sefer Yeshua Yaakov Mater Bazeh Sefer Yeshua Yaakov says this is mutter. Came in the Rav of Vladois Vlad Ma'al Yoldan, since most of the baby calves are viable. He doesn't consider these muktzah. We have to be dealing with an animal, with a calf that koluloi chadashav. What does that mean? Ben tisha chadashim lagasa. If we're dealing with a behemoth gasa, like a cow, we have to be able to tell that it was a viable, it was full term, it was a 9-month cow. The chamisha ladaka, or 5 months, when you're dealing with a behemoth daka, like a sheep. Now let's go to the Ramah. 3 lines from the bottom. Says the Ramah, Hagah. Uba'in gamkein. Not only do we have to be able to know that the animal was koluloi chadashav, that it was a full-term calf, uba'in gamkein shehifris al gabay karka. We also have to see that the animal took a few steps on the ground. The chayshinon, because if we don't see it walk, we have to be concerned. Shema yira by reyasa be'ivarim apnimiyim. You see, if we don't see that the animal could walk, then we have to be concerned maybe through the travails of birth. Maybe when this animal came down through the birth canal, it got squished. It got crushed by the narrowness of the birth canal, and that's why it's not walking. It's not walking because a joint was displaced. Now, if that's true, then we have to be concerned that when the owner of the calf shechts it on Yom Tov, he may find that not only was this animal injured by the birth, and that's why it's not walking, maybe